Well, friends, you can have a seat this morning. And if I haven't met you yet, my name is Mark. And again, if you're tuning in online, if you're an agnostic or if you're an atheist, if you don't know what you believe, we have a chair for you here at On Mission Church. We'd love to have a dialogue with you and converse and get to know you. Well, friends, about 20 years ago, most of you remember the moment on 9/11. This moment that is still vivid in my mind as I was working for the Public Works Department for the city in Oregon in a small town called Dallas. Thank you, buddy. And I was working there, and so I remember that morning where on the left coast, it's still early, so I was just getting out of bed, and you get the news like, well, an airplane hit a tower. And I think most of us thought, wow, what happened with the pilot? Pilot error, right? I'm like, that's really tragic. And then we get the news, there's another plane hit another tower. And then we're all like, okay, this is not some sort of coincidence. Something is going on. Well, and many of you remember vividly every detail of that day. And I do. I remember there being for the public works, we teamed up, the police department came into these meetings, and I was paving roads and literally digging ditches and painting fire hydrants and cleaning up dead roadkill. That was my life back then. And so I remember watching these volunteer firefighters and these first responders and police department in this room, like, okay, guys, and we got this buzz that this is going to go beyond airplanes going into buildings. Word had got this is going to be a full national attack. It's going to be a full moment. It was so vivid. So I tell you, it's a moment. It was so vivid for me. I remember feeling so much anxiety. Baby on the team, the youngest guy on the team there. And they're like, okay, we heard something. They're going to go and they're going to try to get the water stations. They want to poison the water supply of like every town in the U.S. We get this information like who can we send to the gravel road up in the water treatment facility in this little town so Al-Qaeda doesn't get us. Now this is going to be there. Mark up there. So I'm going up there and they literally handed me a I'm up there for 5 hours on this gravel road, looking at any bush, be a full nap in the woods, hearing any crack of a stick in the woods. I'm like, this town is not going. I'm visualizing everything I could do not go. Practicing my kicks for 5 hours. This town dropped. I was ready. It was not going to be dropped. I was ready to take out anybody. But we saw this season of 9/11 as we're mourning, we're weeping the loss of the people that died. But something happened in our country. I remember days after that, you could not find an American flag to buy. They were sold out. Something unified us. It's because we had a common enemy. And today I see that things we're bickering about in culture, all these things that we've known for centuries that are just kind of simple or biological, these things we're fighting about now, and all this division we see, it's like we just don't have or biological, these common enemy. And common enemy. And this morning as we talk about marriage, and I think about how so often in marriage we have difficulty. We talk about marriage. Now this is because difficult seasons because you don't understand your common enemy that you have as you and your spouse together. If you don't recognize the work of Satan and he's together. Marriage, because your marriage, then you'll have a lot of conflict in marriage. But having a common enemy can sometimes bring unity. Understanding, okay, this is what the issue is. It's not my spouse. It's a greater picture. It's the enemy at work here. Well, this morning I was kind of laughing about 10 minutes ago. I noticed that most of you were sitting in the back few rows, and I thought, maybe you read ahead in the Sermon on the Mount. You don't want to be up here this morning to stay a little safer. So last week, I commend you I drove home, and I just felt bad. I'm like, we just cooked our church in a field. Some of you were like wilting by the end of the message out in that hot field, like wilting. But thank you for enduring. But last week, again, I drove home, and I really felt like I had beat the sheep. If I can be honest. I went home, I was like, man, that was just a brutal topic. If you weren't here, we talked about lust and adultery. Now, this is going to be out in a field, and we walk through the Sermon on the Mount. This is going to be a anything, and we're not dodging anything. We go head on into these passages. Dodging. Some of them are a little uncomfortable, but we don't dodge around them. We go right into them. And so today is going to be full steam ahead. I'm just going to encourage you to put on your spiritual seatbelts this morning and keep an open mind and an open heart as we move forward and we look at Scripture and we let God do the work today as He guides us. But this is Elevated Talks, Volume 1. I do hope to continue the Sermon on the Mount, Elevated Talks. You get what I did there? I do hope to continue this in the summer of 2022. I do hope to some of them are do it. And I don't want to do it all for a year. I want to do it in different chunks, baby bites. So we will continue later on. But now, as we walk through this Jesus sermon, as he's by the Sea of Galilee, his elevated talk, I say this is the talk of all talks. Pastors around the globe are stealing from Jesus, saying his sermon. If they can't think of a sermon, let's just give Jesus' sermon. So this morning, I just want to give a few disclaimers. Honestly, I want to say this in all sincerity, because today, what we're talking about, it's not about your past. What we're talking about is about your future. And so I know there are many people here today who are divorced. You've been divorced maybe multiple times, and we're not talking about yesterday. We're talking about tomorrow. So this morning, I'm so thankful that you have showed up. I know we have many people here that I know that are divorced, and maybe this morning you thought this is going to be rough. I think what I'm saying today, you want me to say this because the pain that you have tasted from what you've been through, and you hope the next generation can grab this now as like a form of preventative medicine. So we dive into this insensitive but full of truth and love. I'm just going to proclaim what God has put. Now, this is going to be in front of me in this series. So friends, and also if you're single, don't tune out this morning. It's often when like in churches you bring up things about marriage. Sometimes there's single people who are just like, oh, okay, I'm not going to take notes today. This doesn't apply to me. This isn't applicable to me. Well, don't tune out. Because single people, every one of you who are single, you know someone who's married. And they maybe will confide in you and try to get counseling from you, or they might dump their emotions on you, and God might use you to aim them into this is going to be so in the direction of healing. So I encourage you to take notes this morning as well. Well, friends, I'm just going to start off with some truth. And this morning, I do encourage you to take notes, be braced. Every 13 seconds here in the United States of America, there is one divorce. That equates to 277 divorces per hour, 6,646 divorces per day, 46,523 divorces per week, and 2,419,196 divorces per year just in the United States. Now, there should be no reason why we're talking about this in church. I believe out of any place, any organization, this is a place where we need to proclaim truth with hopes of healing for the next generation. Now, this is interesting as we look at this, as we dive into the topic of marriage and divorce, and I have to laugh a little bit because here we're getting advice from a single 30-year-old man on how to do marriage. And it's funny, a lot of the input we get for marriage through the New Testament is usually from another single guy. His name is Paul. That doesn't mean we don't embrace what they're saying. We can kind of laugh a little bit. Obviously, Jesus, fully God, fully man, unveiling truth to us. We listen to everything that he says and then everything that he's divinely inspired to the people that wrote the Bible. But here we go. And as I read this last week, it's only 2 verses today that we're going to go through. I was going to add so much more. Like there's so much in this. This is more than one sermon, so I'm just going to do 2 verses today. But I was reading this, I'm like, sometimes maybe you guys have thought this, like, Jesus, it would have been so great if you just would have been married. We have all these books we go to, but we don't have anything like this is what you do with your spouse or, practical things. This last week I was in my office, I'm like, Jesus, thank you so much for not being married. Guys, can you imagine? Last week we talked about the bar, right? If you look at a woman with lust, then you're committing adultery in your heart. We had the bar, this track and field term has been set high, now it's a different level. Can you imagine if Jesus was married? We get these verses how he's trimming her toenails every day. He'd be like, no, Jesus, why? Why? Really? So I'm so thankful that he was not married. Now we know theologically, we are as a church, we are the bride of Christ. Some a bride of Christ. It's going to be a full match to a direction of peace with him, as union for us with him as our bridegroom. But until then, we dive into this, and I'm going to go through this a little bit quick today because there's a lot to cover. But our one thing for today, our one thing is this. The goal of every broken relationship should be reconciliation. The goal of every broken relationship should be reconciliation. There are many people sitting here today who are sitting in a broken relationship with someone right now. Maybe that person is not here. Maybe they didn't want to show up with you today. Maybe it's a friendship. Maybe it's a family member conflict. Maybe it is your spouse. And you're thinking, okay, what do we do with this situation? Well, the goal, I believe, as I read Scripture with every broken relationship is reconciliation. Reconciliation. It goes against the grain of the world and the way we think in this cancel culture that we live today, but it's very biblical that we should be aiming towards reconciliation in those relationships. So friends, we're going to look in Matthew chapter 5, just for 2 verses. So friends, we're going to look at direction of healing. Matthew chapter 5, verses 31 through 32. Get your seatbelts on. 2 verses, but there's so much in this. Jesus says this, Sermon on the Mount, and this elevated talk on a hillside in front of, we don't know how many people, disciples were there, more people as well, gathered in listening. Last week he hit the guys hard. He likes to set it, the tone and the bar very high with guys when it comes to marriage. More of the stress and responsibility should be on our shoulders, not our spouse. He says this, it has been said, he says this often, it has been said, so maybe they heard something else. It has been said, anyone who divorces his wife must give her a certificate of divorce. But I tell you, that, now this is going to be a full direction of healing. Divorces his wife, anyone who divorces his wife except for sexual immorality, her the victim of adultery. And anyone who marries a divorced woman commits adultery. This is a very hotly debated passage in Scripture. And many of you you suffered the pain of divorce, and maybe still are experiencing that pain. And you look at this and you're like, what is he trying to say? As he's addressing them, we look at the historical context of who he's speaking this to. So what he's saying here, there's a link missing in this, in the NIV version. In some different versions, there's an and that connects the last few verses. This is going to be, and here in NIV, to this verse. And here in NIV, we don't have that. It just says, it has been said. Some version, and it has been said. The KJV, actually King James Version, says more. So it's like this continuation of what we talked about last week with lust and adultery. So he's saying, okay, there's actually a link here between what we talked about. Now is so at a woman, now is equated with committing adultery in your heart. Now is equated when they were like, what? Now, and back then they were like, what? But I didn't do anything physical with her. No, actually, in your heart, actually did commit adultery. So now we have a link. This isn't a separate thing. There's a link that connects to this now here, that connects to this. Now we're talking about divorce. So now this is this ties in this section very closely with the one that precedes it. Not only is lust, listen to this, not only is lust the moral equivalent of adultery, but so is divorce. Now, why would this be the case in this situation? Why would this be said? Now, in ancient Israel, divorce was not uncommon. Sometimes today we look at these stats, we're like, it's just everything's so broken today. Actually, divorce happened back in ancient Israel as well. Way back in the old times. A man divorced giving her a written wife by giving her a written statement that he divorced her. It wasn't in the court system, it was just a domestic thing. Wrote a certificate, we are done, and gave it to her. Now, back then, women were more like property, and the woman couldn't divorce the man, so the man could divorce the woman. Now, the woman didn't have the right to do the divorce, but she definitely had the right to do things and have the annoyance go up to the point where he's like, I am done. So she did have a little power if she flexed it that way. But now, in most cases, a divorced woman would remarry another husband for her own safety and security. So now, if she remarries someone else, in God's eyes, she was still married to her first husband, because marriage is the permanent union of a man and of a woman. So divorcing a woman virtually amounted to causing her to commit adultery, since she would normally remarry. I know that sits maybe a little bit deep this morning. Maybe your brains are spinning in different ways. Now, I know maybe there's debate today on what this passage means. Well, this is not a foreign concept to have debate. Back then, there were two different Jewish thoughts. Two different rabbis that brought in different ideas for what the passage in Deuteronomy 24 laid out these laws and these rules for ceremonial things and divorce and marriage. So they were torn over what it means to give the certificate. Well, what could it be for? So two schools of thought. There were two different rabbis. One was named Shammai and the other was Hillel. The Rabbi Shammai and his followers maintained that divorce was permitted in the case of adultery, but nothing less. So it had to be adultery. That was the case for Rabbi Shammai. Then there was Rabbi Hillel, and his case was different. His disciples went to the other extreme. They put stress on the words, if she finds no favor in his eyes. So I kid you not, this means if she burned dinner, certificate. If she had split ends, certificate. If she smelled like onions, certificate. I mean, petty stuff. So this is the two different camps as they were debating over this. So Jesus is like, I'm going to set this straight today on this hillside with all of you listening today. Revolutionary thoughts. Here he is trying to make things straight with them. Well, friends, this morning, if you are married, you know that it is a challenge to be married. It is work to be married. Because we know the enemy wants so desperately to rip that marriage apart. I know for myself, when my wife and I first got married, and we knew that divorce was not going to be an option. We actually really didn't even talk about that. I know some couples, they say that in the very beginning. And we met in Chicago, and her dream was to meet a wealthy doctor and live this luxurious life. And she met this guy who's studying Jesus. And here we are, barely making it, but having a great life, right? So we knew when we got married that there would be some conflict in different philosophies. And so it took us a while to figure out different rhythms. I remember just the weird feeling of sharing a space with someone. I'm very independent. I remember just watching her, I'm like, that's how long you brush your teeth? That's weird. And she's like, that's how long you brush your teeth? That's weird. And I just have these habits I didn't even think of. I would just change my clothes a lot from like working out, and then just different clothes. I would just make piles in the corner of the room. I didn't think about it. Just if they're sweaty, I want to put them in a hamper because then it would fester and grow mold or something. So I had this pile, and it just bothered her. We had these little isms, these little things that would just bother us. We're like, how do we do this thing called marriage? This is so much more messy than what I see in Hollywood. This is very different than movies. And so, absolutely, right? So we learned quick that we had to develop some lanes. So my wife today, she has food and finances. I have comedy and construction. So we see at the dinner table as my wife will say something funny and she'll crack a joke, and the girls usually look at Dad. And I'm like, babe, I got this. I got it. And we go back into our lanes. And budgetary things as well. And it's just not, maybe she's really good at it. It's not her sweet spot. But when we first got married, I remember we this whole idea of joining accounts, and she knew she's marrying into poverty, and she was like, why, God, why? Why him? 3 billion. I picked this guy studying Jesus. I remember this moment when she said, well, how much do you have in your account? I said, well, my guess is between $600 and $800. That's my guess. I see her eyes roll back. She's like, oh, Lord, why? His wife, we finally get the banks, and we get to this point where we finally get the bank statements in, and she squeals. And I said, oh, is it worse than that? And she squeals, and she looks at me, she's like, Mark, there's $10,000 in your account. And I just had no idea. And I grew up a simple man. I'm like, well, I didn't just wear the same clothes. I didn't spend money, because if you spend money, you have less money. And yes, I was public school, but it's kind of a basic concept to me. So if you don't spend, you have more. And so I just didn't spend. I bought her like a new pair of jeans every 10 years. I had a great life. She's like, are you kidding me? We're doing fine this first year. But so we finally figured out, okay, she's going to do the budgetary stuff. And she's going to do the food. I'll do the comedy and construction and fix things around the house. We know those lanes now. But these little isms that we have, it's amazing today how for some people, those little things do build up and become big things. They fester, they grow. Little annoyances that we have. Well, Jesus clears this up. He sets the record straight. Last week, he set the bar very high for us guys, how not to wander with our eyes. That if we lust, if we have that second look, we move beyond just a look into a temptation, which is a sin, and a confessor from there and entertain the thought. He said the bar has been set high, gentlemen. Well, Jesus sets the record straight. He says that uncleanness, which is the definition of Deuteronomy, this is how you could divorce your wife. Uncleanness, is not for making a bad dinner. It's not for split ends. It's not for smelling like onions. It's not all these petty things. It is for grounds for divorce. It's permissible if there is sexual immorality involved. Now, I read this and I think, wow, okay, Well, sexual immorality. Why is that the one thing that he has picked? I don't think I have to explain this to you. I'm sitting around very seasoned theologians and adults, and we'll cover that in a little bit. But I look back again, and my wife and I, yes, we both have very issues, but we do not have any grounds in our marriage for divorce whatsoever. And we don't even talk about it. 13 years into marriage, I know I don't know a lot. I'm still learning as we go. But even this last week, as we get different stories from couples going through difficult times, and sometimes in ministry, you hear stories, and it says, and doing the bank, I guess we're actually doing okay. Sometimes you just have a different measurement system, and I'm so thankful for a bride who shares a common enemy with me, and that enemy is Satan. And we try to live on mission every day. But friends, I'm just going to give you a list of reasons that are not to get a divorce, reasons not to get a divorce today. You're not going to hear this from the culture. These are not on the screen, just from my words today. Number one, if your spouse does not meet your emotional needs, that is not a reason to get a divorce. Number two, your spouse is always on their phone. That is not a reason to even think about getting a divorce. Your spouse doesn't look the way they did when you got married to them. Their body has changed. Things have changed. It is not a reason to get a divorce. You and your spouse, you argue way too much. That is not a reason to get a divorce. And if your spouse has a bad habit, that is not a reason to get a divorce. But Jesus makes it clear that if there is adultery involved, a sexual, if it says, and okay, I guess we're actually with your spouse, with someone, union with your spouse, with someone else, if they move on, he says, okay, this is now grounds that it is permissible, because sexual conduct is something that God takes very serious. I was thinking about this, and I'm like, wow, this is interesting. Well, why adultery? It was because we know that sex is not just physical. The culture today is it's just like eating. You sample different bites here and there. It's just something, it's just temporary. Well, hear me, friends, this morning. Okay, I guess we're actually sex is very much emotional, and it's spiritual. Bond with someone else that you are not married to, or even if you are married to them, it is this bond that goes so much deeper than what the culture says. I said this back in the winter. I want to say this again if you didn't hear it then. Sex is like fire. If you keep fire in your fireplace, it will heat your house. If it gets out of your fireplace, it will burn your house down. And so Jesus had these parameters for us about sexuality and the gift he's given us, because sex is amazing. But he says, these are the parameters where you need to do this inside of the confines of marriage. And that alone is for your benefit, for his benefit as well, as we want to be obedient to him. But friends, this will save you so much heartache if you do this inside of marriage. So God takes adultery and sex very serious. He very much aims us to the importance of understanding this. I want to be clear as well. God grants permission for divorce. He does not command divorce. Maybe some of you have been there before and you're like, well, it's in the Bible. Some of you have been there. And it has much so thing I can do, and I'm going to run towards that. Well, friends, I'll just say this. If you need to be separated from your spouse for a season, that is not a season to start dating. That is a season to be on your knees in desperation and prayer, seeking counsel, pastoral counseling, seeking clinical, professional counseling. I love to do spiritual counseling. I'm not a clinical counselor. I'll aim you to the pros because I don't want to aim you in the wrong direction. Please, if that is you, contact the church. We have a pastoral staff that would love to meet with you and walk the journey with you. And if we get to a point, this is beyond us and how we've been trained, we know great connections of people that can counsel you and bring healing to you. And maybe some of you are sitting here today, this applies to your spouse who's maybe not here today. I know it's very tough, but in this season is a season to pray and to plead for them and not to counsel them. Friends, this last year, it's been so weird to see the news and this whole thing we call cancel culture, where it's almost a norm. It's like, if I disagree with someone, then culture, where it's just I have to just X them from my life. We can't even have a conversation. So we have to just completely disown them. We have to move on. We can't even be in the same room with them. The thing, there's so many things that are wrong with cancel culture. Number one, it is graceless. There's no grace. And the beauty in God has made us to have in-person relationship, to walk through disagreements, to sit with someone, look them in the eyes and ask them questions, why they believe that, and learn from each other and go back and forth. Cancel culture is so toxic, and yet we see it happening in our relationships as well. I don't like you. You don't satisfy me, therefore we have to be detached from each other. Well, friends, I'll say this again. The goal of every broken relationship should be reconciliation. So what are you doing to pursue reconciliation with this person? Not to condemn them, not to gossip against them and to slander their name in front of other people and say they did this and they did that, to try to build yourself up. It says, no, we should aim towards reconciliation. That is the goal, because God is the God of restoration, redemption, and reconciliation. Well, friends, I don't want to spend a lot of this time this morning trying to talk about divorce. I think the reason why this is such an issue today, and divorce stats, it's so hard to know what to believe in divorce stats. People say it's similar today, and some people say it's similar in the church, is out of the church, and I don't know who's checking what box and how they define what it means to follower of Jesus because they went to a church event on Easter, therefore they say they're a Christian. I don't know how these things are measured. I don't know hearts. God knows hearts. But the thing is, I don't want to talk about divorce this morning. I was driving here, I'm like, can we talk about anything? Can we talk about anything else, God? The theology of penguins. I don't care. I don't want to talk about this. But I think it's such an issue today is because we don't understand marriage. We're trying to redefine marriage. You see this in the culture all the time. They're trying to make up their own ideas. You can be married to a tree now. I don't know what's next. Maybe a penguin. It's this long list of weird things we're trying to redefine, giving a new definition. Well, friends, let me define marriage very clearly this morning to you. My friends here at On Mission Church and our friends tuning in online, look at Matthew 19. It's not going to be on the screen. You can just hear my words. If you want to turn to Matthew 19, you can, or you can trust me if you trust me. Matthew 19. Later on in the story, Jesus is questioned again. Post-Sermon on the Mount. Matthew 19, starting in verse 1. He gets probed again. They come in different angles at him with these different questions. When Jesus had finished saying these things, he left Galilee and went into the region of Judea to the other side of the Jordan. Verse 2, large crowds followed him, and he healed them there, doing what Jesus does well. I love it. Verse 3, some Pharisees came to him, and they wanted to test him. They asked, is it lawful for a man to divorce his wife for any and every reason? So maybe they heard a buzz. Like, did you hear what that guy said? Way back when he's up on the hillside there, the elevated talk that he gave that one day. Did you hear what he said? So now they're checking him again. Well, hold on. Is it lawful for a man to divorce his wife for any and every reason? So they're checking him. Haven't you read, Jesus says in verse 4, haven't you read? Jesus says this so often. Jesus was a great theological teacher. I know many people would say like, oh, the apostles' disciples were never theologically trained. You don't have to have a degree to be in ministry. You can just, it's like, no, Jesus was a great teacher of the scriptures. He poured into them. He says, haven't you read, he replied, that at the beginning, the very beginning of human existence, the Creator made them male and female. Male and female. It is actually that simple. Male and female. And said, verse 5, for this reason, a man will leave his father and mother and be united to his wife, woman. And the two will become one flesh. So they are no longer two, but they are one flesh. Therefore, what God has joined together, let no one separate. Now, the imagery he gave with one flesh is, okay, you are now one being. I mentioned this before. My wife was speaking at a youth event this one time, and kids in the back were being disobedient. They're being disrespectful to her, and I wasn't going to have any of that. It was a different level of anger in my soul. When I took this kid out and threatened to never baptize him because he wanted to be baptized, like, dude, I'm just throwing everything at him, right? Because really, we are one. So when he was messing with her and making fun of her, that was very personal to me. So Jesus used this imagery of one flesh. So if you imagine what happens when there is a separation, it's the ripping, the shredding, the damage, the wounds, the blood, the pain that's involved when something is trying to be separated that God has put together forever. So Jesus is using strong language here about what marriage is. And he moves on to say in verse 9, he says, I tell you that anyone who divorces his wife, except for sexual immorality, and marries another woman commits adultery. Marriage is defined often in the scriptures, looking back to the Garden of Eden, reaffirmed in the New Testament, and yet we have overcomplicated it in so many ways. So many ways. I want to set the record straight today. One man, one woman. It's a beautiful thing in God's eyes for life together, till death do them part. Now, I want to clarify a few things because I know some of you are sitting here that you've gone through pain. But again, looking at this, the goal of every broken relationship should be reconciliation. Reconciliation. Well, friends, I want to give you some advice this morning. I don't want this to be a Debbie Downer of a sermon. I want to give you some tips. Here are some things. I just have 4 things that will set you up for success in the marriage that you are currently in. Again, we're not talking about yesterday. We're talking about today, moving on forward into tomorrow. These 4 things, I tell you, if you live by these things, your marriage will be incredible. Not in a feelings way, not this happy way. It'll be incredible because you're walking in how God has ordained marriage. Number 1 is this. Have a Jesus-focused worldview. Have a Jesus-focused worldview. So this is like a worldview. We say, this is a lens how you see everything. I know couples often where he's an atheist and she's a Christian. When they're trying to make it work, their lenses are completely different. How they see finances, how they see anything from clothing to what you do for a career and how you use your time and your leisure. It all goes through a lens. And if that's not the same lens, you will be unequally yoked and it will be a disaster in so many ways for your marriage. Have the same Jesus-focused worldview. Number 2, have a common enemy. Don't look across the table. Don't look across the bed and say, you are the enemy. No, Satan is the enemy. He is ripping and trying so hard to destroy what God has set up as a pinnacle of creation, the family structure. We see every day more and more it gets twisted, it gets ripped to shreds. We have to fight for this. We have to try to protect this and realize that the enemy is Satan. Now, number 3, this is important as well. Walk in the Spirit. Well, what does it mean to walk in the Spirit? In the New Testament, Paul and other authors use this imagery of walking in the Spirit or walking in the flesh. The flesh is me, selfish gain. And then you have the Spirit laying down our life, taking up our cross, denying ourselves and following Him. That is walking in the Spirit. I know when my wife and I argue, I've said this before, but it's usually I can tell when my volume goes up, I know I've lost the argument. Because I have nothing to stand on. So I'm trying to base it on volume instead of accuracy. Because I know I'm probably wrong. So I know when my volume goes up, I'm not walking in the Spirit. I'm walking in the flesh because I want to win the argument. But Jesus has so much more for us. He wants us to walk in the Spirit in humility, showing the fruit, evidence of the fruit of the Spirit. And number 4, friends, this is the thing I want to hammer home today. Constantly be running towards reconciliation. What can you do to help mend the situation? Not to cancel the person, not to make fun of them, not to tweet about them and what they did. No, how can you run towards reconciliation? Praying for them, trying to make things right. Well, friends, I'm so excited because a lot of this what we're saying for the next generation, this is what I call preventative medicine. And we have youth leaders here, our church, a great, amazing team led by Joe and his wife, Holly. And tonight, they are meeting with our students at 6 o'clock at Joe and Holly's house. I'm so excited for our students. If you have neighbors who are teens or if you have teens, make sure to let them know that Joe and Holly are back. And they just survived one of the greatest tests of marriage. They just did over 7,500 miles in a 1993 Ford Ranger and they slept in it. Their marriage is still good. I kept checking them on this trip. Like, you guys good? Are you sure you're good? Like, dude, is the knot still tied? Because my wife would be like, oh, I'm out of here. They are back, you guys, and we believe in the next generation in this church. We believe that we really can live this out. And down the hallway, Niani and her team are leading our students to understand biblical principles, to set them up, to avoid the pain that some of you have experienced, to try to avoid that. So I'm so proud that we have an amazing team of leaders here ready to guide the next generation. Now, I want to say this, friends. I say this in love. If you have been through a divorce, I'm speaking to a lot of you this morning, you are not alone. I'm not yelling at anyone this morning. I know a lot of churches, maybe that's a thing in the South I've heard of, screaming at people, and I don't understand that. I can't scream to save my life. I have to use one of these things or else I'd lose my voice. But friends, if you have been through a divorce, maybe you were sinned against. Maybe he left you or she left you, and it was out of your control. Well, let me be clear. If this happened to you, and this is before you were a follower of Jesus, yes, we know that sin is great, but grace is even greater. And he extends that grace to you in forgiveness of what you've been through. And now you have this new start to your life. I know of couples in this church that are starting over, and they're doing this right, rooted in God's word, moving forward. And that's what we aim for as a church. That's what we want you to do. And so now you have a new chance to do this in the way that God intends you to do this. And friends, maybe if you have been burnt, if you have had someone that has sinned against you and they've hurt you in many different ways, and I know I almost thought about doing the math this morning, but I don't feel like you have to know the tens of thousands of dollars or hundreds of thousands of dollars that goes into the messiness and the pain of a divorce. Well, maybe some of you this morning, you feel like that you are still suffering from the pain of the divorce. Maybe he just left you. Maybe she just walked away. And maybe you feel super alone and you feel rejected. And you're thinking there's no way that you can have reconciliation come to the forefront of your mind because the pain is so strong. Listen to me very clearly this morning because the pain is... Can we talk about... If that is you, church, if that is you, you have a friend in Jesus. Because Jesus was rejected in a way that we will never understand. But he identifies with you in your suffering. That he came down to earth and God said, hey, these people are all sinned and they're separated, they've had these trespasses. I'm going to send my son to make a way for reconciliation. And Jesus came down and he was made fun of and he was left alone to die. They were spitting on him, they beat him. And he experienced the pain of being alone and suffering. So if that is you this morning, you are not alone. You have a Savior that can identify with you and the rejection that you feel. And friends, this morning, as you think about your relationships, and I hope I'm giving you some good tools as you aim forward in your relationship this morning, is if you do feel like you have a broken relationship, I do pray that you can aim for reconciliation today. Reconciliation is the goal. And friends, as we think about the cross, at the end of this message, I can't remove the cross from this to think about what Jesus did for us, how he paid for our sins, and he knew that things would be broken, and he extends grace to us. And we as a church, we want to extend grace to you and walk the path with you. So if you want to contact the church, please do this week. If you want prayer for your marriage, if you're sitting here like this is really tough, you've thought about throwing in the towel, we as a church body, and I speak for all of our staff, we desperately love you, and we want to pray for you and go to battle for you. As the band will come up later on, we will have some elders in the back that would love to pray for you. If you just want prayer, no judgment, no one's going to look in the back. Just go to the back. We'd love to pray for you. Friends online, if you need some prayer, make sure to make some comments. We'll read those comments. We want to pray for you as well. But friends, this morning, I'm just going to ask that you can finish with just your hands in the air and surrender again. Just do this for me this morning as we aim to be God-centered couples that aim and run towards reconciliation. But first it means we have to surrender our own agendas. Let me pray for you. Jesus, thank you so much for this church body. God, thank you so much for this difficult passage. And Jesus, I know there are so many people sitting in so much pain here today. As they've had to walk the path, as they have been burnt by someone, as they had someone walk away from them. And Jesus, we mourn for them. But we know that you identify in that pain because you suffered. You tasted rejection. You felt all alone. You said, Father, take this cup from me. You couldn't bear this anymore. But Jesus, we ask that you heal our marriages at On Mission Church. We trust that you can do a great work in our marriages, God. We trust that you can have the men here in these relationships lead and lay down their life as you lay down your life for your bride, the church. Jesus, we want to be like you. So God, keep our marriages strong, and we love you so much. And Jesus, I pray this in your name. Amen. If you'd like prayer this morning, friends, just head back to the back. We'd love to pray for you.